So let's hear it for the home team. So this year, our theme is igniting the archetypes. We are complex beings. We are spirit, soul, and body. We have within us unlimited potential, and we have access to myths, stories, history, our ancestors. And so what if we could easily and automatically gather the information and what's within us of the different archetypal patterns as the need arises? So what if we could just access this information easily and freely and completely, because it is available to us. So this month, we are looking at the archetype of the maverick or the rebel, the advocate. So last month, we explored the ruler. So this month, we get to break the rules. The qualities of the maverick are independence, freedom, innovation. And I think if there was an archetype that would be the United States, I think the archetypal pattern would be the maverick, at least in our very beginning, yeah? Because we fought for our independence from the English, we fought the Revolutionary War, and wrote the Declaration of Independence. I mean, how much more mavericky can you get? How much more rebellious can you get than that? Where we affirmed the pursuit of happiness for each individual. We affirmed equality. Now, granted, when this was written, these things were not necessarily in place for women or for slaves. And yet, the seed was planted in that day. The seed was planted, the intention was there, and as time goes on, we see that it flourishes and takes on different forms than what it perhaps was originally intended. So freedom is core to our being. It is who we are. It is a part of our DNA, if you will. I remember, when I lived in the yoga ashram, part of the deal, this is the late 70s, early 80s, was the guru is God. And so if your teacher, your guru, told you to do something, you had to do it without questioning. And I was there for about a year. And I was able to do this for about a year. And then my Western mind started to take over. And I realized that I couldn't follow this path, that this was not the path for me. And about a year later, I found unity, which fit very well. But what I notice about this country is that we take ideas and we sort of mix them up and make them our own, right? When I think about yoga back in the late 70s, early 80s, you had to follow a specific lineage of the type of yoga that you were doing, and you had to be true to that lineage. And what I've seen Americans do is just throw it out. It's like this works over here, and this works for me, and this works for me, and it's become kind of a mix-up of all kinds of things. We get to practice different forms of whatever it is that works for us, and it's part of that creative spark that is within us. I would think that most of you in this room probably have a very strong maverick archetypal pattern, because I don't think you'd be here if you didn't, right? I mean, how many people in this room were raised in unity? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4. And so in order for most of us to be here, we had to rebel against something, right? We had to rebel against being a Catholic or a Baptist or whatever, or maybe we were raised with nothing, and so we created our own, and this sort of fit. We look around the room and we see the tapestries, which symbolize all the different religious paths. And so there's this kind of built-in rebel and this built-in maverickness of being in the New Thought movement, of being in unity. Now, I chose the maverick for the month of February because, as you know, I'm kind of matching them up a little astrologically, and for me, Aquarius represents the maverick. Any Aquarians in this room? Yes, so independence, doing things differently, being a little bit ahead of everyone else, or just kind of saying, hey, have you looked at life a little bit differently in this way? Maybe a little eccentric even, huh? My son is an Aquarius. He's eccentric at best. They challenge authority. Sometimes they can feel like an outsider looking in. And what's interesting to me is that the planet Uranus rules Aquarius, and the planet Uranus, its axis of rotation is tilted sideways. It's not obeying the rules. The north and the south poles lie where most other planets have their equators. So here we even have a planet that's not going to go along with the rest of everybody else. It's got to be a little bit off, a little bit tilted. And so when we look at the maverick, when we look at the rebel, it's a little bit off, it's a little bit rebellious, it's maybe a lot rebellious. Prometheus is a great example of the archetypal pattern of the rebel or the maverick. Prometheus stole the fire. Zeus got angry. He was the head god. Zeus got angry at humans, and so he decided to take fire from them. Well, how long would humans live without fire? Not very long, right? Even though they knew about fire, it had been taken from them by Zeus. And so what Prometheus did is he flew up to the heavens, he flew up to the gods, and he stole the fire, and he brought it back to humankind. Now, of course, he was punished for doing this, and Zeus was so mad that he let Pandora in her box come down to earth, which opened all other kinds of things. And that's also part of being a rebel, isn't it? It's like we change things and move forward, and then oh, well, there's these other things that are happening that we didn't quite see or know were going to happen because of this. So Prometheus represents that part of us that is creative and wants to steal fire, in a sense, and ignite this passion that we have for independence and for self-expression and for revolution and for movement in different ways. So when we are expressing the positive qualities of that, we have a great capacity for change, we have individualism, we have creative freedom. But when it is not being used, remember last month we talked about the idea of when we are not owning our inner ruler, then an outer ruler may take over. When we're not owning our inner authority, guess what? Someone else will take that authority for us. And when we are not really owning the creative expression, we can then tend also to act it out in different ways. Richard Tarnas said it this way, that when a person has not integrated the Promethean impulse in a positive way, there is a strong tendency to experience this archetype as something that happened to one from without in upsetting, disruptive ways. That is, instead of being ourselves a source of change and independence and excitement, we may tend to have change and unpredictable events thrust upon us. So when we don't use that expression of change, when we don't own that individualism and individuation, then we can find ourselves in disruptive situations, or maybe we create disruptive situations without even knowing it. So last month, we took on a ruler posture. Remember, we sat like we were on a throne. How would a rebel sit? What's your posture if you're a rebel? Yeah, like who cares? Yeah. Tell me something I don't know. Take on that posture of the rebel. Jesus was a maverick. Jesus was a revolutionary. One of the things he said is, I have not come to break the law, but I have come to fulfill the law. He was accused of being a blasphemer. He overturned the money changers that were in the temples. They'd been there forever. And all of a sudden he comes in and says, no, they don't belong here. He stopped a woman from being stoned who was caught in adultery. He said, those without sin, you can cast the first stone. He kept going against the status quo. And in the end, this maverick, it cost him his life. But rebels come to change things. The idea of rebellion leading to innovation, reform, and ultimately renewal is at the heart of this powerful archetype. So Jesus came and he changed our perception of God. At that point, God was seen as Jehovah, this God that was out there, whose name you couldn't speak, Eloheinu or Yahweh. He came and called God Father. He called God Daddy. He changed our perception of God. He changed our perception of what the kingdom is, because up to that point it was like this earthly kingdom, and he showed us it was a kingdom that is within us, that is expanding consciousness, that is not of this world. So when you think of rebel, what do you think of? Do you think like James Dean? Forgot his name there for a minute. Or we think of lots of tattoos or different colored hair, or we think of all these different extreme views maybe of a rebel. But the truth is, the rebel can show up in ordinary clothing. The rebel can show up in an ordinary way. And I want to use the example of Rosa Parks, because she certainly didn't appear from the outer to be this great leader and rebel, and yet she was. She grew up in Alabama, and she grew up walking to school while the white kids were on a bus and they got to ride to school. And she said in her autobiography, she said, "I'd see the bus pass every day, but to me, that was a way of life. We had no choice but to accept what was the custom. And the bus was among the first ways that I realized that there was a black world and that there was a white world." Now, interestingly enough, in 1944, for a small amount of time, she worked at Maxwell Air Force Base. And even though Maxwell Air Force Base was located in Montgomery, Alabama, the laws of segregation did not apply because it was federal property. And so she rode on an integrated trolley, and she said, "You might say that Maxwell opened my eyes." So I'm sure many of us know the story. The buses in Montgomery, Alabama were segregated, and the white people would ride in the front and the blacks would ride in the back. And there was a sign that was movable. So the sign would say, colored only. And so if you were sitting by the sign, but more white people got on the bus, then they would take the sign and they would move it farther back. And whoever was sitting, if African Americans were sitting, they would have to get up and leave and go sit toward the back. And this was the custom. This was what was. They hated it, but it was what was. And then one day, she got on the bus. She sat in the middle. She was right behind the sign. A lot of white people got on, and the bus driver got up. And she'd already had a confrontation with this bus driver a couple weeks before, but got up and moved the sign. And other people got up and moved. And I want to share her words directly, because she said, "When that white driver stepped back towards us, when he waved his hands and ordered us up and out of our seats, I felt a determination cover my body like a quilt on a winter night." And what we see is the rebel archetype, the maverick taking over. It's like she has no choice at this point. It is so strong in her that she is not about to move no matter what. Her whole life, in a sense, has built to this moment, and she is not going to move. She said it is a misunderstanding. A lot of people say, well, yeah, it was because, she finally had enough because she was old and she was tired. And in her book, she said, "I wasn't old. I was 42 years old, so I wasn't old." And she said, "I was not tired physically, or no more tired than I usually was at the end of a working day. And I was not old, but I was tired of giving in. I was tired of giving in." She said, "I had not planned on getting arrested that day. I had plenty to do without having to end up in jail. But when I had to face that decision, I didn't hesitate to do so because I felt that we had endured that too long. The more we gave in, the more we complied with that kind of treatment, the more oppressive it became. And so she said no. The bus driver says, I'm going to have to call the police. And she said, well, you got to do what you got to do. So they arrested her. She was fined. And it began the boycott of the buses where the African Americans walked to work instead of riding. And of course, it broke the whole system. It broke that particular system anyway. And she has become a symbol of the civil rights movement. She is a maverick. In fact, her birthday, I think, is like February 4th, a true Aquarian that she is. So, in that moment, the rebel, the maverick stepped in. The archetype, the archetypal pattern became so strong in her that she could not do anything but what she did. So how about you? Where is it in your life right now or in the world where you're seeing an injustice, where you're seeing something that, it's just kind of nagging at you, that inner maverick wants to stand up to that, wants to say something, wants to move forward because it's about change. The maverick, the rebel, is about change. It's about doing things differently. We are free to pursue our happiness. So, as we continue to explore this archetype, I invite you, as you move forward, to embrace your inner rebel. Dress like you think a rebel would dress. Maybe walk like the planet Uranus, a little bit off. Just kind of play with that energy in your life. Now, next week is Valentine's Day, so I figured out how we can do the maverick with love, but we'll figure that out. The rebel is the creative innovation. It is the energy of changing the future for the good of all. And I think Robert Siltanen said it the best when he said, here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them, but about the only thing you cannot do is ignore them because they change things. They push the human race forward, and while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. So let us call forth within us that rebel, the advocate, the rebellious one, and change those things that need to be changed, not only in your personal world, but in the larger world. May it be so.